We continue now at the top of Daf Pei Gimel Amud Aleph from Meseches Bava Basra. This is Bava Basra Daf 83a. And the previous summit, the Gemara said that if a person buys 3 trees, so he gets the land between the trees along with the purchase of the trees. And the Gemara asked on the previous summit, how much space is there between each tree in order that we say it's considered to be that he gets the land as well as the trees. And there was a machlokas amoroim. Rav Yosef said it's between 4 and 8 amos, and Rav Nachman said it's between 8 and 16 amos. And Abaye said to Rav Yosef, don't argue with Rav Nachman, because we have a Mishnah. The Mishnah in Kilayim says that if the rows of the vineyard are spaced by 16 amos, and then they're too far apart from one another to be a problem of Kilayim, they're considered separate, it's not considered to be a vineyard, and there's no problem of Kilayim in that situation, as the Mishnah in Kilayim explained, and so therefore it does seem that the maximum distance is 16 amos. And so Rav Yosef responds to Abaye, he says, I don't know about that Mishnah, but I do know that there was an incident, Bedura Durausa, there was an incident in Dura Durausa, and the Rashbam says, Bedura Durausa Be'ir Shel Roim, it's a city of shepherds, that's what it means, Dura Durausa. Some say that Dura Durausa was actually just the name of the place, but in any case, there was an incident over there, Shemachar Echad L'Chavero Shlosha Ilonos, that a person sold to his friend 3 trees, V'lo haya ches amos beinein, and there was not 8 amos between them. V'yamar le Rav Yehuda, and as we'll see in a moment, Rav Yehuda said to him, he said L'mocher, he said to the seller, Zil havle l'lokech hakarka, in this situation, you have to give him the land, give the buyer the land, V'yafa gav dein beinein, ela kimole bakar v'kelev, even though it's a small amount of space between them, it's just the amount of space for the cattle and its vessels and its tools. And so the Gemara continues, V'yasu l'kamei de Rav Yehuda, they came before Rav Yehuda, V'yamar le, he said to him, Zil havle kimole bakar v'kelev, give him again this amount of space between the trees, the amount for the cattle and the amount for the vessels. V'lo havi yadana kimole bakar v'kelev kamen. Rav Yehuda says, I didn't know how much is that space, how much is mole bakar v'kelev, but kaven de shamata l'hadatran. But when I heard the following Mishnah, it says, Lo yita adam ilon samach l'sadeh chaveiro, a person shouldn't plant a tree near the field of his friend, elim ken hirchik mimena dalet amos, unless there's a distance of 4 amos. V'tani alon, we learned a brais on that Mishnah, dalet amos she'amru kadei avodas hakerem, that the 4 amos that we talk about is in order to have enough space to work the vineyard, to be able to work that area. So Amina, so then I said to myself, Shma Amina, we see from this, Kimole Bakar V'Kelev Dalet Amos, that the space of the amount of a cattle and its vessels is going to be 4 amos, and so therefore you see again from this incident that it's actually between 4 and 8 amos that is considered to be one unified vineyard or one unified orchard, and it's in that amount of space, if the trees are distanced from one another, that amount of space between 4 and 8 amos, so then we say he gets the land as well. But the Gemara continues, Rav Yosef milotnan, do we not have a Mishnah that supports Rav Yosef as well? In other words, again, on the previous Amud, Abaye brought a Mishnah from Kilayim which seemed to go against Rav Yosef, but in the very same Mishnah we have opinions that seem to follow Rav Yosef. Because that same Mishnah in Kilayim, it says, Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Shimon Omrim, that Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Shimon, they say, Hanoteas karmo shmona amos al shmona amos, if somebody plants his vineyard and there's a separation of 8 amos between the rows of the vineyard, so mutter lahavi zera l'sham, you're allowed to plant other items over there. The idea is, again, it's not a problem of kilayim because it's not considered to be a vineyard because they're spaced by 8 amos. So you see from this Mishnah, like Rav Yosef, that it's actually 8 amos that is already a great enough distance between the rows that it's not considered to be a vineyard. And the Gemara continues, Afilu hachi, nevertheless, ma'isa adif. In the Mishnah that Abaye brought that was against Rav Yosef, that wasn't simply an opinion in the Mishnah, it was an actual incident that was recorded in the Mishnah, and that's why it's better to bring that as evidence, and it's a proof against Rav Yosef, and the fact that there are some Tanoim in the Mishnah that support Rav Yosef, that was not relevant in Abaye's view. And the Gemara continues, B'shalom Rav Yosef. Now I understand, according to Rav Yosef, Aliba de Rav Shimon, Rav Yosef, according to Rav Shimon, again that's the Rav Shimon and the Rabbi Meir that's mentioned in this Mishnah. I understand Shaminan le mefuzarin v'shaminan le ritzufin. We understand both the minimums and the maximums, meaning if it's scattered, that's mefuzarin, and ritzufin if it's close together. What we mean to say over here is that Rav Yosef says between 4 and 8 amos is considered to be a vineyard. So there's a minimum amount. If they're too close together, if each row is within 4 amos of one another, so then it's already considered overcrowded, it's not considered to be a vineyard. And the other way as well, let's say it's too far apart, let's say it's 8 amos or more apart from each other, so then it's too spaced apart, and it's not considered to be a vineyard in that situation as well. And so the Gemara is saying, we understand, according to Rav Yosef, within Rabbi Shimon, we see both the minimum and the maximum. Mefuzar and hadiyamr. Now, mefuzar, and that's what we just quoted, because we said if they're spaced 8 amos apart from one another, that's 8 amos or more, that's the maximum amount, so already already 8 amos is too far apart from one another to be considered to be one unified area, to be considered a vineyard. That we saw. And Ritzufin D'Tanan, we also see the idea of Ritzufin, which means that if they're too close together, we see that in a Mishnah as well, because the Mishnah says, Karam Hanatua al Pachos Midalad Amos Eino Karam. It says if you have a vineyard and it's planted on less than 4 amos, meaning there's less than 4 amos space between each row, that's not considered a vineyard. Divrei Rabbi Shimon, that's the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. Again, that's the same Rabbi Shimon we just quoted. But the Chachamim say Karam, it is considered to be a vineyard even if it's very close together. Because we can look at the middle rows, we can imagine that they are not there, and then we essentially say that it is considered to be a vineyard. But the Gemara continues, but according to Rav Nachman, within the view of the Rabbanon, so mifuzarin shaminanle, so we understand, or we've heard the case of scattered. Again, that was the Mishnah brought on the previous Amud, that if they're spaced 16 amos or more apart, that's already too far apart to be considered to be a vineyard, and that's why it's not an issue of kilayim. So that we already see within Rav Nachman, within the Rabbanon. But Ritzufin mishaminanle, but where do we see an idea of Ritzufin that if they're too close together, because again it had to be specifically within 8 and 16 amos, but if it was 8 amos or less space between them, then it was considered too crowded to be considered a vineyard. But where do we see that idea? And the Gemara says Svarhu. The Gemara says really we don't see it explicitly, but it's logical. Midil Rabbi Shimon Palga, because since we see that in Rabbi Shimon, you go by half, meaning to say it's between 4 and 8 amos. The idea is that 4 is half of 8. So therefore, the Rabbanan Nami Palga, according to the Rabbanan also, we're going to go by half. So if the maximum size is 16, so the minimum is going to be 8, because we're going to divide 16 by 2 and say it's between 8 and 16. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rava. Rava says, Hilchas of the halacha actually is, Me'arba amos v'ad sheish esrei. It's from 4 amos until 16 amos. So essentially taking the minimum from one side and the maximum from the other side and expanding it any amount of space. If the rows are between 4 amos and 16 amos away from each other, that's considered to be a karam. And the Gemara continues, Tanya Kavase de Rava. We have a brisa that supports Rava. Kami hu mikuravin arba amos. How close are they supposed to be together? It's 4 amos. V'kami hu meruchakin. And how much of a distance? Sheish esrei, it's 16 amos. Again, you see here from between 4 to 16 amos. Hareza kanakarka. In that situation, if the person buys the 3 trees and they're spaced in that fashion, he will acquire the land. V'yasa ilanos shabenein. He'll acquire the land and the trees that are between these trees that he bought. Lafikach, therefore, Yavesh Ilano Nixas, if the tree dries out or gets cut down, Yesh Lo Karka, he does have the land, he can replant. Pachos Mikano Yeser Alkan, but if the spacing is less than that or more than that, Osha Lakachan Bazech Arzer, let's say he bought it one after the other. He didn't buy them all at the same time. Hareza Lo Kana, so in that case he does not acquire Loas Akarka Veloas Hilano Shabineyan. He doesn't acquire the land between them, he does not acquire the trees between them. And since he does not acquire that, Lafikach, therefore Yavesh Ilan O Nixas, if the tree dries up or if it gets cut down, Ein Lo Karka, he has no land, he's not able to replant in that space. And we will take a look at Tosas over here. Kama Yehum Ruchakim Tezzayin Amo Hareza Kanakarka. Again, the distance is 16 amos. So Tosas asks, V'teim, it's a wonder. Degabe Mecher B'Tezzayin Lo Chashivim Ufuzarim. By a sale, when you're talking about exactly 16 amos, that's not considered to be scattered. That's considered to be unified enough that V'Kanakarka, that the person acquires land. V'gabe Kilayim, but by Kilayim Chashivim Ufuzarim at exactly 16, that's already considered to be scattered. Essentially, Tosas is asking over here, when we say between 8 and 16 or between 4 and 16, whatever the amount is, what happens at exactly 16? It seems to be a bit of a contradiction here in the Gemara. When it comes to kilayim, it said that if it's 16 amos exactly, you're allowed to bring other seeds over there. It's not a problem of kilayim. And so Tosas answer via Shlomo, we can answer as follows: the Gave Mecher Modedin Amos Mitzumtzamos. Maybe when it comes to a sale, we measure exact Amos, meaning we don't expand to the Amos at all. It's the smaller size Amos, so to speak. Aval Amos Kilayim, Hein Amos Shochkos. But when we talk about measuring Amos by Kilayim, it's Shochkos, it's a little bit larger. V'yefsher Shalo Yehi Yoser Mitazayin. So in such a case, when you're measuring in that fashion, it is really going to be a little more than 16. Lakach Hashivim Mefuzarm. That's why we say over there that 16 Amos, it's considered to be mefuzarm, it's considered to be scattered, because in reality it's a little more than 16 amos. So according to that, when we say that it's from between 4 and 8, or we say between 8 and 16, so the numbers there you're supposed to include the numbers fully, meaning from 4 to 8 would include 4 and 8 as well, from 8 to 16 would include 8 and 16 as well. And the Gemara continues, Boy Rabbi Yirmiyah asks the following question, Kishu Moded, when he's measuring these 16 amos, let's say, Mimakam Katzer Humoded or Mimakam Rachav Humoded, from where on the trunk of the tree are we doing the measurement? Are we doing it from the area that's the narrower part of the trunk, or are we doing it from the wider part of the trunk? Amar le Rav Gavia mi Beik Seal le Rav Ashi, Rav Gavia from Beik Seal, he said to Rav Ashi, Tashma, coming here the following proof. To Tanan, we learned in the Mishnah, this is also Mishnah in Kilayim, Harachuva Shebegefen, let's say you have layered vines. This is talking about when you have some younger branches and then you layer them with the older branches. Eino moded elame ikar hasheni. It says over here that you're going to measure from the ikar hasheni, from the second root. And the idea over there is, as the Rashbam explains, it's the average size. You're not going to take the part of it that's too narrow, and you're not going to take the part of it that's too wide. Boy, Rabbi Yirmiyah asks the following question: Machar lo shlosha badei ilon ma'u. Let's say a person sells, you don't sell 3 trees, but it's 3 branches of trees, but all of these branches are coming out from under the ground, so even though it's really coming from one tree, but from above the ground, it appears as 3 separate trees. So mahu, what's the halacha in terms of acquiring the land between these branches? Amar lei Rav Gavia mi Beik Seal Rav Ashi. Rav Gavia from Beik Seal said to Rav Ashi, Tashma, coming here the following proof. The Tanan, as we learned in the Mishnah, also Mishnah in Kilayim, Hamavrich gimel gefanim v'koreihin and nirin, a similar kind of case. A person is being mavrich, he's layering 3 branches of the vines, and you can see the ikar, you can see it coming out. It's coming out from the ground. They look separate. Rabbi Lazar Rabbi Tzadok Omer, Rabbi Lazar Rabbi Tzadok says, Im yesh beinein midalad amos v'yat shmona, if you have a distance between them from 4 to 8 amos, mitzdarfen, so then they join together. V'im lavein mitzdarfen, and if not, they're not mitzdarfen, they don't join together. And the point over here is that as long as it's the normal distance that we use to measure to see if something is a vineyard, this is considered to be a vineyard, and so therefore you see that we're considering it to be separate entities in this situation, since that's how it appears to the eye. And the Rashbam explains, Tashma, coming here a proof. This is a proof in terms of whether we measure from the narrower parts or from the wider parts. Demin habeinoni humoded, and so the Gemara is bringing a proof that you actually measure from the average part. Harachuva shebegefen, again, this is the layered branches of the vine. Gefen bocher markiven begefen zaken, as we said, this is when you have the younger branch and you layer it with the older branch. Kishu moded dalad amos beintayim, when he's measuring the 4 amos between them, kadeshu shtayim keneged shtayim v'yachas yotze zonav, so that you have 2 next to 2 of them, and then you have one other one. Again, this is just a formation, a particular formation in terms of the halachas of kilayim, of vineyards. Ikar hasheni, so you're supposed to measure from the second root, or pekak hasheni, you're supposed to measure from what is called the second joint. Kidetani, as we learned in a brayso, bekonim uvegefanim and hapekak ulamala. Again, when it comes to these reeds and these vines, you're measuring from the joint and above. Avalobin ha'ikar harishon, you're not going to measure from that first joint, from that first root. Sharachav yoser, because that's already too wide. Velomin hashlisha, you're also not going to do it from the third. Shakatzar harbe, because that's too narrow. Element habeinoni, the point is you're going to do it from the middle one, the average one. Vahu adin li lanos, and the same is going to be true when it comes to trees. And then the Gemara asked, Gimel bade elon, let's say you have 3 branches of a tree that are coming out. It looks like 3 separate trees. Elon echad macharlo. The case over here is he sold him 1 tree. Sheyesh lo shalosh badim meruchakin zem ized dalad amos, but you have 3 branches, they're distanced from one another 4 amos. V'hela karka sirton, and the earth, it's actually come up, it's covered up the roots of this tree, so that now it looks like 3 separate trees. V'nirin b'shas mechira kashlosha ilonis, at the time of the sale, it actually looks like he's being sold 3 separate trees, even though it's really just 1 tree that's covered with dirt, with 3 branches coming out. So that's the question of the Gemara. Miazlin basar gofa ilon demine karabu, do we follow the tree itself and say it's 1 tree? Ve'ein lo karka, then he doesn't get land together with the sale. Odilmar maybe came in the nishashu kol echad bekarka, since each one has now effectively taken root in the land, kanakarka, so it's 3 separate trees and he gets the land as well. V'yafagav the mechabri mitachas lakarka, even though they really attach to one another under the ground. V'yistamukmi la begimel ilano so machalo bad bechol echad. Rashbam says some say the case over here is not actually 1 tree, but it's 3 trees, and then there's a branch that he sells him in each tree. V'lo nehira, but the Rashbam says he doesn't seem to, the Rashbam does not believe that this is the correct explanation. To came in the shayr liatzmo rov kol bad ilan v'ilan shayr gam makarka liatzmo, if he's leaving for himself so much of the actual trees, so certainly the seller is leaving for himself the land as well. And so the Gemara brought a proof again from a Mishnah in Kilayim. Hamavrich means kofef emtsois hagefen bekarka. The case over here is a person takes part of the vine, the middle part, he bends it into the earth, umechaseu bekarka, he covers it with land, be'emtziaso in the middle, ukashenisharish be'emtziaso chotzchen ikar harishon v'nasu shtei gefanim. Eventually it's going to take root. He'll be able to cut what is connecting the 2 of them, and it will become 2 separate separate vines. So Gimel Gefanim Keshehuvrachu Bekarka Nasu Vav. Here you have 3 of them, they become 6 when you do this, when you put them underground. V'Havi Kerem, that already is going to be a vineyard. Devechol Vav, because when you have 6 of them, Ika Shtayim Keneged Shtayim V'Achas Yotze Zonav. You have the proper formation of 2, 2, and 1. You have that at minimum. You have that formation to make it a vineyard. V'Hilkach Nakat Gimel. That's why we have a case over here of 3. Deinu Yachalim Tzohei Gefanim Bepachos Migimel, because you're not going to, if you're not mavrich less than 3, you're not going to have the necessary 5 to create the kerem. The shtei gefanim muvrachos lo have eladalit. If you're going to take 2 of the gefanim and do this to 2 of them to bend the branch under the earth to be mavrich you're only going to end up with a total of 4. It's not going to be 5. V'ikarein nirin kolomar sheishrishu. What we mean by ikarein nirin is we mean that it took root. So again, the question is: are we looking at these as separate vines, or are they going to be considered to be together as one vine? If we look at them separately, then we can say we have a vineyard over here. And so it said that we look at them separately. Midal Amos v'ad ches, Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Shimon Le'el. We're going to use the measurement of 4 to 8. That follows Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Shimon before. That's between 4 and 8 Amos. Mitzdarf, and it joins together. V'afagav dechol shtei gefanim yankim mishorosh echad. Even though each 2 of them really is all one root. V'uadin l'shalosh b'ad ilan dekana karka. The same is true by the 3 branches. As long as the earth is covering everything up and it looks like 3 separate trees, we're going to say that you acquire the land as well. Just like over here by Kilayim, where we're going to say that they're considered to be separate and therefore they actually form a vineyard, even though it's really all one, but they appear to be separate, and therefore that's considered to be a kerem. And the Gemara continues, Boy Rapapa asked the following question, Machar lo shnayim besoch sadeu. Let's say he sells him 2 trees that are within his field, but the 3rd tree that he sells is actually on the border, on the boundary. Mahu, what's the halach? Is that considered to be like selling 3 trees, and we say he gets the land or not? And the Gemara continues, Shnayim besoch shalo. Let's say he sells 2 that are within his property, v'echad besoch shel chavero, and then he's selling the 3rd tree. He owns the tree, but it's not actually within his property, it's within the neighbor's property. So what would be the halach? Is that considered like selling 3 trees? And the Gemara says teku. The Gemara leaves this as a question. And the Rashbam explains, v'echad al hametzer, again he's selling 2 trees in his property and 1 on the boundary. Mehave haflog, is that considered to be too much of a distance one to the other? V'lo mitzdarif, if you can't join it together since it's on the boundary. To lo dami l'sada ilan, the point is it doesn't look similar to a standard orchard. V'lo kanakarka, then he won't acquire the land. It's not considered to be like 3 unified trees. Odil makaner, maybe we say that he does acquire. V'imtim salomar, the Rashbam learns this as an imtim salomar. V'imtim salomar dekana. Now, if you say to the first question that it is considered to be 3 trees and he gets the land, so what about in the following case? Shtayim besoch shalo v'yachad besoch shel chavero mahu. What if it's 2 trees within his property and then 1 tree that he's selling is his tree, but it's in his neighbor's property? What's the halacha? Kagon sheyesh lo shnei ilanos b'ksei sadeu. The case could be here. For example, let's say he has 2 trees at the edge of his field. V'yesh lo adayin ilan echad shekana b'sad chavero hasamach lilanos halalu. He also owns 1 tree in his neighbor's field. V'yesh lo gam hakarka ima ilan. He owns the land with that tree as well. And so now the question is again, is that like selling 3 trees that the buyer gets the land as well? And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Pei Gimel Amud Beis.